The wind over the flayed plains of Xylos-IV did not sing. It rasped like a dull blade against the teeth of the world. Amara Vance hauled her collar against a chill that sought the marrow, her breath a succession of pale ghosts dying in an atmosphere too thin to sustain even a memory. Before her, the outpost rose, a collection of slab-sided monoliths, utilitarian and cold, birthed from the scorched stone as if the planet itself had grown a tumor of human ambition. History, that grand and lying architect, spoke of oceans and emerald canopies before the Ky'shari War. Now, the land was a fossilized scream, its skin flayed by beamfire until only the most resilient scars remained. The League clung to this rock not for the reach of its tactical shadow, but because forgetting is the first rot of an empire. Amara shifted the weight of her pack, the burden of the sleeve, the ache of the meat, and forced a pace that the thin air contested. She was a laggard to her own induction, a sin of timing in a world where the clock is a hangman. The dust of Xylos, a rust-colored shroud, had already swallowed the footprints of the morning's intake. "Move it, Vance," barked Sergeant Xylos-IV. His face was a map of old campaigns, the skin tanned to the texture of a combat boot, his scowl a permanent fixture of his hardware. "The others have already paid their tithe to the ritual. What slowed your pulse? Recruit? A failure of transit or a failure of nerve?" Amara offered the truth, a transport delay, knowing that in the military's cold geometry, a reason is merely a decorative excuse. "Tradition is the anchor we drag to keep from drifting into the void," Soto grunted, jerking a thumb toward the central plaza. "Get moving." The square was a hollowed lung of stone, empty save for a central figure that commanded the silence. It was a Ky'shari woman, carved from the local rock with a precision that bordered on the sadistic. She sat with arms splayed in an ambiguity of posture, either a saint's welcome or a captive surrender. The stone captured the ridged geography of her brow, the blue-skin lineage rendered in a pale, mocking gray. Her eyes were sealed against the light, her expression a balanced tragedy of sorrow and stillness. Time had gnawed at her, a fissure ran like a tear down her cheek, and her fingers had been eroded to smooth nubs by the superstitious touch of 1,000 recruits. "You know the liturgy," Soto said, arms crossed like iron bars. "Kiss the brow of the Aethel-Soul. Seal your oath to the peace with the taste of the grave." Amara felt the weight of the theater. The statue was no monument to peace. It was a trophy of the hunt, a conquered species taxidermied in granite to remind the victor of his height. The kiss was not an act of love, but the final brand on a slave's skin. She approached the figure, noting how the rock seemed to pulse with the dying light, a translucent quality that suggested the stone was merely a thin veil over something more visceral. She leaned in, the alienation of the act settling in her gut-like lead. Her lips touched the cold brow, a meeting of warm meat and frozen geology, but the sensation was wrong. Beneath the surface, there was a thrum, a rhythmic ghost of a heartbeat transmitted through the density of the world. She recoiled, the sensory input jarring her stack. "Did you feel that?" she asked, turning to Soto, but the air itself fractured before he could answer. A roar, deep and tectonic, climbed from the gut of the planet. A web of cracks ignited across the statue's skin, racing outward from the point of Amara's kiss like lightning seeking the earth. The eyes, once blind stone, snapped open to reveal a luminescent blue that stained the plaza in the color of a dying star. The granite sloughed off in great, heavy flakes, revealing the supple, terrifying grace of blue skin beneath the rime. The statue was a shroud, and the woman within inhaled, a sharp, desperate draught of air that had been denied her for centuries. Amara stumbled, her sleeve failing her as she hit the dust, her gaze locked on the resurrection of a nightmare. Soto's bark was swallowed by the static of his own comms. Lights across the outpost flickered and bled out, the power grid dying as the planet reclaimed its energy. The Ky'shari woman rose, shedding the last of her lithic skin with the fluid lethality of a predator. She was a spire of blue grace, her limbs long and built for a gravity humans could only dream of. Ash coated her like a funeral rite, and hair the color of frozen nitrogen spilled over her glowing eyes. Those eyes found Amara, piercing through the digital noise of the mind to the raw meat of the soul. "You kissed me," the woman said. Her voice was a melodic friction, an accent that turned the League's tongue into a haunting psalm. It was not a question. It was the cold accounting of a debt. It was a ritual. We didn't know, Amara stammered, scrambling to find her feet while her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. We thought you were a ghost in the rock. Now they will return, the woman continued, her focus drifting to her own hands, studying the long fingers as if reacquainting herself with the concept of touch. The Aethel-Soul is fractured. The void pulse has been loosed. Soto, his hardware failing him, drew his sidearm, a primitive gesture in the face of such ancient power. On your knees, Zeno, he commanded, the tremor in his voice masked by the steel in his hand. The woman turned to the muzzle of the gun with the indifference of a god watching an insect. Your lead cannot patch the hole you have torn in the silence, she said. The pulse is already screaming across the vacuum. As if punctuating her prophecy, a high-frequency whine tore through the atmosphere. Amara looked up to see the sky igniting. Satellites, cold and dead for a century, flickered into a malicious wakefulness. The ground buckled again, and from the red dust of Xylos, structures began to rise like the ribs of a buried titan. Resonance arrays, etched with the glyph code of a civilization built on the harmonics of the soul, broke the surface. The woman closed her eyes, listening to a music Amara could not hear. They have heard, she whispered, her glow dimming with a sudden, crushing sorrow. The tide is coming back. 6 hours later, the command center was a tomb of red light and frantic breathing. Admiral Elena Drogos stood over a holographic map where the space around Xylos-IV had begun to bleed icons of unknown tonnage. They simply materialized, Commander Malik Abra said, his voice a dry rattle. No warp signatures, no fold space ripples. One moment the system was ours, the next, we were surrounded by ghosts. The ships were asymmetrical nightmares, their hulls adorned with the same glyph meat as the planet's ruins. They were structures of ceremony and slaughter, massive and silent, forming a strangler's noose in high orbit. Warships? Drogos asked, her voice the cold click of a chambering round. I know the archives, Abra replied. Those are siege foundries. They don't just fight, they erase. But the Ky'shari are a dead lineage. We broke them 100 years ago. Apparently, Drogos said, her eyes finding Amara in the corner of the room. Death was merely a temporary sleeve for their patience. She gestured for the recruit to speak. Amara recounted the kiss, the heartbeat, and the awakening, her words feeling thin in the presence of the Admiral's cold acuity. The systems were dark for 13 minutes, Soto added, his pride as bruised as his shins. When the light returned, the plaza was empty. She vanished into the rock. Xylos is a honeycomb of Ky'shari rot, Abra said. Caves, ruins, tunnels that defy our surveys. She could be anywhere. The air in the room suddenly ionized. A transmission tore through the encrypted channels, bypassing League firewalls with the ease of a knife through silk. An alien face filled the hollow projector, older, its blue skin ridged with the scars of ages, eyes burning with the hard light of a sun going nova. League outpost, the alien intoned, the words heavy with the gravity of an executioner. The covenant of silence is a tattered rag. The void steward is loosed. We return to collect the interest on a debt you have forgotten how to pay. This is Admiral Elena Drogos, the Admiral countered, her posture a defiant line against the alien light. We know of no covenant. The awakening was a failure of intelligence, not a declaration of war. We are prepared to negotiate. The time for breath is over, the Ky'shari interrupted. The Aethel-Soul was the seal. It is broken. Prepare your meat for the harvest. The transmission died. The holomap showed the fleet beginning its descent, spreading out like a dark stain across the atmosphere. Get me command, Drogos ordered, her voice a whip crack. Priority Alpha. I want every redacted file on the Ky'shari ceasefire. I want the truth, even if it's buried under a mile of classified grime. An intelligence officer stepped forward, his face pale under the emergency lights. The files don't exist. They've been scrubbed at the stack level. Redacted, erased, purged. Someone wanted the details of the piece buried deeper than the grave. So we're fighting a ghost for a crime we don't remember, Abra summarized, the cynicism of the career soldier bleeding through. I need to find her, Amara said, her voice cutting through the panic of the officers. The woman from the plaza. She called herself the Void Steward. She is the only one who knows the rhythm of this war. You're a recruit, Vance. Not a hunter, Soto snapped, but Drogos held up a hand. The Admiral looked at Amara, seeing the focus of a sleeve that had already accepted the possibility of its own destruction. She's the only tether we have, Drogos admitted. But we need a coordinated sweep, not a rogue scout. An alarm shrieked, a roar, grating sound that signaled the breach of the atmosphere. They are landing, Abra reported. Dropships, 30+, dispersing toward the resonance arrays. Drogos turned to the room. Battle stations. Defensive shells. Get the civilians into the dirt. In the surge of bodies and panic, Amara slipped through the shadows. She didn't need a sweep. She needed the silence. The League search teams would bring the clamor of boots and the hum of scanners. They would find nothing but empty stone. Amara knew the steward had looked at her, not as a soldier, but as a key. She moved through the outpost with the ghost quiet of her border patrol years, a life spent in the margins of the meat grinder. She hit the locker, stripping the shelf of what she needed. A survival pack, a scanner, and a pulse rifle that felt like a heavy, cold sin in her hands. She exited through a maintenance hatch, the night air of Xylos hitting her like a physical blow. Above, the sky was a theater of war, the Ky'shari ships descending like dark gods. No one watched the ground. They were too busy staring at their own ends. She stepped into the wasteland, the geography a maze of crevasses and obsidian-sharp stone. She set her scanner to life signs, a crude tool for a task this delicate, and began to track the faint, humming energy of the steward. Hours bled into the red dust. Twice, she threw herself into the grime as Ky'shari vessels passed overhead, their engines a harmonic vibration that rattled her teeth. Dawn broke, not with light, but with a bruised purple haze. She reached the skeleton of a Ky'shari colony, foundations half-swallowed by the earth. The sun cast long, distorted shadows that mocked the eye. Her scanner chirped, a signal, dense and alien, pulsing from the heart of the ruins. The geometry of the colony was a headache made of stone, the paths designed to frustrate the linear human mind. Perspective shifted with every step. The walls seemed to lean in, then recede. The eye is a liar in this place, a voice said. Amara spun, rifle leveled, to find the Void Steward standing atop a broken rampart. She had draped herself in woven grasses, her blue skin luminous against the gray rot of the colony. The scanner is a crutch for those who cannot hear the world, she said, stepping down with a grace that made Amara feel like a clumsy beast. I need the truth, Amara said, her voice raw. You bring a tool of lead and fire to seek wisdom, the steward observed, her eyes on the rifle. A typical human irony. Amara lowered the weapon, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. The fleet is here. They are secure coding the planet. They say the Covenant is void. What did we do? The steward's gaze was a surgical probe. Why did you come alone, Vance? Where are the kings and the killers? They are busy dying, Amara said. I wanted to understand. A faint, cold smile touched the alien's lips. Then follow. The stone has a long memory. They entered a dome of intact crystal and stone, the air inside heavy with the scent of ozone and old dust. Glyphs on the walls pulsed with a slow, biological light. I am Lyra-Vahn, the woman said, settling onto the floor with the stillness of a mountain. To your historians, I was a footnote. To your soldiers, a trophy. A symbol of a peace built on a lie. The statue, Amara said, her mind struggling to reconcile the meat with the monument. How did you endure? The stasis weave, Lyra-Vahn replied. It transmutes the biology into a lithic lattice. It preserves the spark while the sleeve turns to stone. A living death, Amara. A sentinel's vigil that never sleeps. You were awake? The horror of it settled in Amara's throat. For centuries, Time is a fluid concept in the weave, Lyra-Vahn said. I felt the seasons pass like heartbeats. I felt the touch of your recruits, their mockery, their fear, their boredom. I was the silent witness until your kiss shattered the Aethel-Soul. I didn't know, Amara whispered. Ignorance is the luxury of the victor. Lyra-Vahn countered, rising in a single, terrifying motion. But the Ky'shari do not forget. We are the architects of the debt. She moved to a wall, her palm sparking a hidden glyph. The wall liquefied, the stone flowing like dark water to reveal a teardrop of pure crystal. The wall was a meat grinder that neither side could sustain, she explained. Your people had the numbers, mine had the elegance. To save the species, a bargain was struck. The Ky'shari would withdraw, but a steward would remain, a hostage and a monitor. Through me, my people would know if the League kept its word. The ethereal zones, Amara realized. The worlds we were supposed to leave alone. Sacred soil, Lyra-Vahn spat. Sites of resonance that your League terraformed and strip-mined while claiming they were empty husks. Your kiss was the signal. The void pulse that the Covenant was a corpse. My awakening told my people that the League had chosen the path of the beast once more. It was a mistake. Amara shouted. A tradition we forgot the meaning of. A crime forgotten is still a crime committed, Lyra-Vahn said. The crystal in her hand projected a holoscape of slaughter. Ky'shari ships were not just at Xylos. They were seizing resonance sites across a dozen systems. They were reclaiming the sacred with the brutality of a holy war. They will not stop until the League is a memory or the debt is paid in full. The League won't just roll over, Amara said. They'll burn everything to keep what they stole. Then the galaxy becomes a crematorium, Lyra-Vahn replied, her voice a balanced weight of grief and resolve. She held the crystal toward Amara. Unless a new pulse is sent, a new silence established, a new Aethel-Soul. The dread hit Amara then, a cold realization that bypassed her nerves and struck the marrow. You mean someone else has to go into the stone? The high cortex will not trust a steward who has been broken, Lyra-Vahn said, her eyes locked on Amara's. It requires a new soul, a human soul, a sacrifice that proves the League's word has weight again. No, Amara backed away, the meat of her sleeve revolting at the thought of the lithic cage. I can't. I won't. Then watch the sky, Lyra-Vahn said simply. Watch the stars go out one by one until there is nothing left but the dark. Outside, the horizon ignited with the first exchange of orbital fire. They moved through the canyons as the sky bled fire. The Ky'shari strike teams were landing, their weapons making a harmonic hum that vibrated through the earth. My people are methodical, Lyra-Vahn said. They will seize the resonance arrays first, then the command hubs. Then the purge begins. And killing me stops none of this? Amara asked, her cynicism a shield against the mounting terror. If your death could buy a decade of peace, I would have already spent you, the steward replied. They were heading for the resonance hollow, the site of the original signing, a place where the stone remembered the vow. A tremor, violent and tectonic, threw them against the rocks. The planet was reacting to the war, its core destabilized by the orbital strikes. Run! Lyra-Vahn commanded. The rich beneath them began to disintegrate, falling away into a maw of superheated gas and darkness. Amara sprinted, her lungs burning, the ground liquefying under her boots. She slipped, her fingers clawing at the crumbling edge of a fissure. Lyra-Vahn didn't hesitate. She leapt across the gap, her blue skin a blur of motion. She caught Amara's wrist, her grip like a vice of warm chrome. Move, she ordered, hauling the recruit upward as the ridge vanished into the abyss. The path ended in a sheer drop, 30 meters of jagged obsidian. Jump, Lyra-Vahn said. Are you insane? Amara screamed. In answer, the steward wrapped her arms around her and stepped into the void. The fall was not the visceral snap of gravity. It was a slow descent through a sudden, heavy medium. They landed with a jar that rattled Amara's stack, but the meat remained intact. Amara lay in the dust, gasping. How? Ky'shari physiology can manipulate the local field for a breath's duration, Lyra-Vahn said, favoring her leg. Blue-black blood, thick and crystalline, seeped from a gash in her thigh. You're bleeding, Amara noted, the primal instinct of the medic kicking in. It's nothing. We must reach the hollow. Amara ignored her, tearing a strip from her pack to bind the wound. The steward's blood was hardening on contact with the air, turning into jagged shards. A defense mechanism, Lyra-Vahn explained. Above them, the whine of a League dropship cut through the air, its searchlights sweeping the ravine like the eyes of a hungry god. They're looking for us, Amara whispered. No, Lyra-Vahn corrected. They're looking for their trophy. They think I am the key. They pressed into the shadows as the lights passed. The resonance hollow was a semicircle of polished rock, a natural amplifier for the voices of the dead. At its center sat a transmitter, a hybrid of alien soul and human steel. They reached the canyon floor and found the cost of the delay. A League patrol lay slaughtered, 6 men reduced to meat and scrap. Standing over them was a Ky'shari strike team, their skin glowing with the static of the kill. They didn't even get to surrender, Amara whispered, the bile rising in her throat. Surrender is a concept for those who still believe in a future, Lyra-Vahn replied. One of the alien soldiers looked up, his eyes burning with a righteous, ancient fury. Amara and the steward ducked, retreating into the labyrinth of the rocks. Those soldiers were children, Amara realized, on both sides, dying for a lie they hadn't even been alive to hear. The weight of the sacrifice began to shift from a horror to a necessity. A Ky'shari dropship hovered nearby, its engines throttled to a low, predatory growl. I volunteered for the stone, Lyra-Vahn said suddenly, her voice a low vibration in the dark. My clan had the deepest connection to the sites you desecrated. I chose the burden. Some honor, Amara spat. Honor is the weight you carry so others can stand upright, the steward countered. They crested the final ridge. The resonance hollow gleamed in the moonlight, its surface a mirror of Xylos-IV's pain. This was Valaresh, Lyra-Vahn said, a city of spires and song. Your orbital fire turned it into a mass grave. The hollow is all that remains. Lyra-Vahn approached the transmitter, her hands hovering over the controls. They will kill you for this, she said to Amara. You will be erased from the scrolls. Amara looked at the dark opening of the deep cairn at the base of the rock. The truth is already erased, she said. I'm just making the silence official. The Xylos-IV is below, Lyra-Vahn said. It is the heart of the world. Amara took a breath, the air tasting of sulfur and the end of things. She followed the steward into the deep cairn, the descent a slow walk into the gullet of a god. The walls were etched with living glyphs that fed on their biorhythms, glowing with a sickly, reactive light. They record every soul that passes, Lyra-Vahn said. You are being written into the planet's stack. The chamber opened into a cathedral of impossible dimensions, supported by pillars of woven crystal. At the center sat the Xylos-IV, a sarcophagus of shifting, liquid stone. Amara saw a second structure in the shadows, shattered and stained with old, dark matter. What happened there? Xandris, Lyra-Vahn said, a warrior who thought he could master the stone with his will. But the weave requires more than strength. It requires the surrender of the ego. When his mind recoiled, the system tore him apart. His scream echoed across 50 light-years. And you think I can do what a warrior couldn't? Amara asked. I think you have nothing left to lose but your fear, Lyra-Vahn replied. The meat is a cage, Amara. The stone is a sanctuary. How long? Amara asked, her voice cracking. Until the species learn to look at each other without a lens of blood, Lyra-Vahn said. Potentially forever. A massive explosion rocked the chamber, the ceiling weeping dust. The war had reached the hollow. The decision is a blade, Lyra-Vahn said. Choose. Amara looked at the Xylos-IV. She thought of the meat, the pain, the brother who would never know her fate. Then she thought of the fire in the sky. She stepped forward. Tell me what to do. Strip, Lyra-Vahn commanded. The weave needs the raw interface. No barriers between the meat and the machine. Amara shed her uniform, her bare skin erupting in goosebumps in the chill of the cairn. She felt small, a fragile biological accident in the heart of an ancient power. Lyra-Vahn touched her chest, her fingers burning hot. You will not age. You will not die. You will become the silence. Amara climbed into the sarcophagus. The material was a cool, viscous jelly that began to mold to her form. Does it hurt? She asked. Only the transition, Lyra-Vahn said. She leaned down and kissed Amara's brow, a mirror of the act that had started the fire. For symmetry. And for the debt. The steward began to sing, a haunting, subvocal frequency that activated the weave. The liquid stone rose over Amara's legs, her hips, her chest. Lyra-Vahn's eyes went distant. I felt every touch, she whispered. Every mockery. I felt your people's lives played out like a shadow play while I waited for a truth that never came. My father, Aethel-Soul, wanted this for himself, Lyra-Vahn said as the stone reached Amara's neck. He died trying to save me from the honor. His last words were, peace built on sacrifice is no peace at all. I have spent a century wondering if he was right. Suddenly, Lyra-Vahn stiffened. Her irises blazed. The high cortex had bridged the gap, their psychic voices a thunder in the chamber. A human, they spat. A weakness. She will shatter. She chooses, Lyra-Vahn countered, her mind a shield for Amara's transition. When have we shown such courage? A deeper voice, the elder, silenced the clamor. We will watch. If she endures, the debt is stayed. The stone flowed over Amara's mouth. Her lungs burned for a final second, then the need for air vanished. Her pulse slowed to a crawl. Her vision went dark, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate from the center of the universe. Amara Vance ceased to be meat. She became the word. 10 years passed on Xylos-IV. The scars began to scab over with green. The research center rose where the outpost had fallen. In the plaza, a new statue stood, a human woman, hand outstretched in a gesture of eternal offering. The plaque was simple. She didn't stop the war with a weapon. She stopped it by becoming the peace. In Neo-Mombasa, Lyra Vance sat at a table of cold chrome, staring at a holographic lie. Missing in action. Presumed deceased. Her son, Kale, paced the room, his anger a sharp edge in the quiet suburb. 10 years, and they give us a redacted ghost story, he spat. She didn't run, mother. She was doing something. Something the League is afraid of. I've transferred to the diplomatic corps, Kale said, his eyes on the window. I'm going to Xylos. I'm going to find the truth she deserves. Outside, the news feeds showed humans and Ky'shari shaking hands. A peace built on a foundation of stone they were forbidden to touch. Admiral Elena Drogos, her white hair a crown of old sins, stood before the statue. A young lieutenant asked her who the woman was. Nobody of consequence, Drogos lied, her hand hovering over the stone palm. Just a recruit who understood that the loudest voice in the galaxy is the one that chooses to be silent. As the admiral left, a slender blue figure emerged from the shadows. Lyra-Vahn placed a hand on the statue's cheek, the only one allowed to touch the Aethel-Soul. Nearby, a child named Anaya pointed at the frozen face. Look, Mommy. She's smiling. The mother looked, seeing only the cold geometry of the monument. But in the dying light of the sun, the lips seemed to curve, a subtle shift in the lithic lattice. The debt was paid. The silence held. Amara Vance smiled at the world she had saved, and the stone smiled back.